Good evening, friends. This is Natalie Silva with Life Treasures and Golden Moments, where I share with you true stories of miracles and stories of inspiration. Welcome back. And for my new listeners out there, welcome aboard. It's wonderful to have you with us. Today, I'd like to share two stories of true miracles. And the first story is called, What is Your Feather? And it was authored by Monica A. Anderman. On Job 6:11, what strength do I have that I should still hope? What prospects that I should be patient? I turned off the kitchen faucet and cocked my head toward the sound of the television. The subject of the afternoon talk show was, What is your feather? And I could hear the roar of applause in the host's opening monologue from my father's kitchen where I was working. Since my mother's passing earlier that year, I had been coming to the house daily after my shift in the office to cook, clean, and just generally help out my elderly dad and disabled brother, only to repeat the same process in my own home later that evening. To say that I was tired was an understatement. So I decided to leave the kitchen and sit on the edge of the living room coffee table to watch the show and rest just for a moment. The guest, a middle-aged woman whose husband had died after a brief battle with cancer, went on to describe an experience that she had several months after his death. She explained that as she was walking through one of her favorite places, a park where she and her husband had shared daily strolls, she became so consumed with grief that she begged to be shown a sign of her husband's love and an indication that he continued to watch over her. The guest recounted how, as she sat on a park bench with her head in her hands, she began to sob deeply. At that moment, a perfect white feather floated down from the heavens and landed softly at her feet. She had received her sign and was amazed at her answered plea. She took the feather home, framed it, and kept it in her living room as a reminder of her husband's love for her. Oh, how sappy, I thought. It was just a simple coincidence, nothing more. The guest went on to say that she had written to the talk show about her husband's illness and his decline, her journey with grief, and her amazing feather experience. He and his staff were so moved by her story that shortly thereafter a crew was sent, courtesy of the show, to redecorate her living room around the framed item. A videotape was shown of the beautiful renovation, and the audience cheered wildly. Audience members were then asked to share their own feather experiences, and a parade of stories began. Some participants spoke of poems, special notes, of photos all discovered post-mortem, which represented a love past, each item having its special place in their journey through grief and healing. The host then challenged all viewers to identify their own feather during the next commercial break. Wearily, I rose from the spot where I sat and returned to the kitchen to continue my duties. In a moment of bitter exhaustion, I wondered why no one had yet been sent to my home to simply do a load of laundry or shop for some groceries. As I worked, I continued to consider the talk show host's challenge to define my own feather. My feather? I couldn't think of one. After nursing my mother through 5 years of what doctors called her final stages, I had no feather. Just memories of late-night phone calls followed by rushed visits to the hospital emergency room, endless hours spent waiting in doctors' offices, and incomprehensible medical explanations. And now, with all my added responsibilities to the remaining members of my family, I didn't even have a moment to myself to breathe. My self-pity continued to grow as I recalled how dedicated my mother and I had been to each other. We truly enjoyed each other's company and had even been on several vacations together, just the two of us. I surmised that most mothers and daughters that I knew weren't as close as we were. Yet, when the time came for me to move on and live my own life, she had the good grace to let me go. Even after I married, though we remained a strong part of each other's lives, we spoke on the phone daily and often met for lunch, hunched over our hamburgers and fries, talking girl talk. Through the years, we continued to be each other's source of strength. She helping me to stay focused during a cancer scare in my late 20s, and me helping her through her many years of illness. In those final years, she would always pat me on my hand before we would part, and would say, "Remember," she'd say, "no regrets when I'm gone." We had a wonderful time together here on earth. During my drive home that evening, I rallied against the memories, good and bad. Didn't I too deserve a feather? Surely after all my mother and I had been through together, after all I had done for her, I also deserved a message of encouragement and confirmation of love from beyond. I shook my head and tears spilled down my cheeks. I arrived home and parked my car as I did each evening. Before exiting, I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. Then I walked slowly down my front walkway with my head hung low. As I reached the top step, I stopped, stunned. There lay one perfect white feather. What a touching story. And also a sign that tells us there are miracles out there. So if you're looking for a miracle, open those eyes and be receptive. Look for those feathers, those pennies, those dimes, those quarters, or whatever you look for as a signal from a loved one. This next story that I am about to share was written by Giselle Reis, as told by Marie Teresa Miller. And you might have heard it before. It is titled The Miracle of Mariette Reis. And when I heard this story, it gave me goosebumps, and I think it probably will you too. Proverbs 3:7. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. In 1942, when I was only 6 years old, the world outside my house in Nazi-occupied Winterslag, Belgium, was filled with dangers. But inside our home, my 3 siblings and I felt protected and in a cocoon of happiness and faith. We were devout Catholics who were often forced to worship at home. During the war, there were a few priests available to say Mass. Even when Mass was offered, it was too dangerous to walk the streets. The Hitler Youth were known to shoot people for no reason. In our home, my mother, whose name was Mariette Reis, and my grandmother encouraged great devotion to the saints. They taught us that each saint had a specialty. My grandmother visited us on the feast of St. Andrew and insisted we girls pray to him for worthy husbands. We also prayed to St. Anthony for help finding lost things, and to my favorite, St. Teresa, the little flower, for assistance in anxious times. One day, my mother was taking my baby sister for a walk, and my mother cut the back of her hand on an old stroller. The cut became infected. She had not yet recovered her strength from the birth, and she was undernourished because of the wartime food rationing. So her body was unable to fight the infection. It spread up her arm. At that time, there were no antibiotics to administer. Wet compresses were applied in an attempt to drain the infection. But my mother's health deteriorated. The local medical clinic sent a nun who was a nurse to care for her and to feed and clean us children. She was a sister of charity, the ones with the big white hats. She was a petite woman named Sister Elizabeth. We called her Sister Babette. Despite Sister Babette's care, gangrene set in, and the tissues of my mother's arm died. She ran a high fever, suffered delirium, and fell into a coma. My father took us to see her and told us to say goodbye because she was going to heaven. I was frightened to see her lying there, not moving. I didn't want to lose my mother. My mother's doctor, Dr. Reinhardt, was well known in the town as an atheist. He was a rough-speaking man, prone to swearing. He examined my mother and decided that her arm had to be amputated to save her life. He would operate the next day. Sister Babette objected. "You can't do that with a woman who has 4 children. One is a baby, too." But the doctor just said, "Well, I'm coming tomorrow to amputate her arm." That evening, Sister Babette placed a picture of Father Damien face down on my mother's arm and wrapped bandages around it. The nun had been raised in Father Damien's hometown of Tremelo, Belgium, and had been told the inspiring story of his life many times. Father Damien was just 33 years old when he traveled to the island of Molokai in Hawaii to administer to the exiled leprosy sufferers at the Kalawua settlement there. He cared for the ill, both spiritually and physically. Father Damien literally embraced his flock. He dressed their sores, anointed them with oil during the sacrament of extreme annunciation. With his own hands, he helped his parishioners build proper houses. He fashioned coffins for the dead, and he even dug their graves. Then Father Damien contracted leprosy and died at the age of 49. Over the years, Sister Babette had developed a special devotion to Father Damien. So that night, she placed his picture on my mother's bandaged arm. She prayed for his intercession on Mom's behalf. Dr. Reinhardt returned the next morning with surgical instruments, including a saw to cut off my mother's arm. He removed the bandages and saw the picture and really swore. "What the hell is this piece of junk on her arm?" he shouted. "It's Father Damien," Sister Babette told him. The doctor tore off the picture, but Damien's face remained imprinted on my mother's arm. Her wound had opened, and the infection had drained. The gangrene was gone, the tissues of her arm healthy. Dr. Reinhardt turned to Sister Babette. "Well, it looks like your saint did the trick." My mother was completely cured. She filled our home with music as she played the piano. She was not disabled in the slightest way. Father Damien not only healed my mother, but he also touched Dr. Reinhardt's heart. The doctor proclaimed throughout the town that my mother had been miraculously cured. From then on, he became a regular parishioner into the Catholic Church. After the war in 1946, my family traveled to Louvain, Belgium, the site of Father Damien's religious order. I get chills when I recall the small town and the room there, with piles of crutches leaning against the altar and the walls covered with items from people who had been miraculously cured through Father Damien's intercession. In Louvain, my mother was questioned by a priest about the miracle. Formal papers witnessed by Sister Babette and Dr. Reinhardt were filled. My mother's cure would be one of the miracles officially listed and considered to support the beatification of Father Damien. Someday soon, the Catholic Church will make it official. But ever since that night he cured my mother, I knew Father Damien was a saint. And this I read later, and it said that Father Damien was beatified on June 4th, 1995, by Pope John Paul II. On July 1st, 2009, Pope Benedict certified the final miracle required for Damien's sanctification. Father Damien was declared a saint on October 11th, 2009. I hope that you enjoyed the stories today and that they were a source of inspiration for you and will carry you through the rest of the week. Thank you so much for listening today. I look forward to being with you again soon. Have a beautiful day and a beautiful week, and until next time, take care and God bless. This is Natalie Silva.